Oops, is it recording? Sweet.
Yeah.
How's it going, everyone? And welcome to the Bot Podcast, where we interview movers, shakers, and innovators and talk all things conversational user interfaces. I'm your host, Chad Oda, and today we have a very special guest, Natasha Takahashi. She is the co-founder of School of Bots and the CMO of Ineffable Marketing. Not only has she designed and developed over 80 high-performing messenger chatbots for her customers, her chatbot education company, School of Bots, trains countless entrepreneurs on how to leverage messenger chatbots that scale marketing, sales, and operations with intimacy and automation. Natasha also runs a 2,000 plus chatbot community online and frequently speaks at venues such as Deloitte, Startup San Diego, and Gen Z Takeover. At that, welcome to the podcast, Natasha.
Thank you so much for having me, Chad. I'm super excited for our conversation today.
Absolutely, likewise. So before we get started into more specific chatbot questions, I always like to ask our speakers sort of a more unique question based on their background. And I saw on LinkedIn that you had previously worked in Rio de Janeiro, helping to launch a social entrepreneurship ecosystem.
Yes.
With Viva Rio. So I was really curious, what was like one of the most important lessons that you had learned from that experience that really still sticks with you today?
Yeah, that was my first exposure to consulting. Before that, and I think for anyone who hasn't consulted, doesn't really have a definition for it. You can look it up and you understand it's guiding or advising a company, but it's still a very obscure definition. And so I worked with Viva Rio over a 4 or 5 month period in order to create this space. And even though it was a little bit unorganized and it was hard to communicate with them since we were on different time zones, nonetheless, I think the most important lesson that I learned was that people from both ranges of social class can come together and actually create something, co-create, as opposed to the upper classes just funding something for the lower classes, right? That's always kind of been my impression of anything, foundations and scholarships and even, angel and VC funding. It usually tends to be that way. But for this, it was very interesting because we had people from the lowest classes in Brazil, which is the favelas, the people who live there, and then people who live on the asphalt, which is, the cities and the people who can afford to live there. And so they both came together to help us create this space. And then we just, advised the project and suggested what was working for spaces back in the US. And so I think that was the most important thing, was just understanding how that can actually be possible and then seeing how it was done so that hopefully I can do something similar in the future in other places in the world.
No, I think that's really phenomenal. And, I think specifically, as it relates to chatbots in particular, I think we're focused on a lot of the business use cases, but then, I think there are large and greater implications also for social causes and nonprofits.
Totally. 100%. Yeah, it's something I definitely want to get more into that I haven't had a chance to, purely because needed my business to make money, obviously, at the beginning. And so I haven't had a chance to dive into that yet, but I do actually have a few students who want to work with me on different charity chatbots, as well as even some for organizations that help charities, such as like fraternities and sororities, and then be able to help them donate, et cetera. So that's something I'll hopefully be working on towards the end of the year or in the next few months.
Cool. Very cool. So sort of running and moving into some more chatbot specific questions. Why don't you tell me a little bit about, School of Bots or Ineffable Marketing and, the specific customer need or opportunity that your companies are addressing?
Yeah, so I'd say with the agency, it's a little bit different for both because the agency is where we offer an entirely done-for-you service so that small and medium businesses mainly that we work with can entirely outsource anything chatbot related to us. And so the value that really comes with that is they don't need to learn it. And it's such a new thing that most agencies aren't offering it yet, quite frankly. But on the other end, with the chatbot education brand, it's been really a mix of things. We help people start their own businesses as one part of it, which can be a combination of new entrepreneurs as well as agency owners. And then we also help consult and we're working on a couple different projects in that space. And so I think the real value and approach for us is figuring out where the bot can be implemented in every part of the business, as opposed to just starting with marketing and stopping there, right? A lot of people see the open and click rates for chatbots, and I think that's a great eye catcher to then pull them into the rabbit hole further, if you will, to understand what a bot can do for their business, as opposed to just saying, great, it's there for lead generation and qualification, and now from there, hopefully it'll bring in leads consistently, and that's it. But for us, and as you saw at the Gen Z Summit we were just at, or conference, I tried to touch a little bit on the approach. Didn't get too much time since we were only talking for 15 minutes. But our general approach at a very high level is we focus on marketing, which is obviously most important and the driving force at the beginning, and then focus on making the bot profitable. And then our third phase is actually automating their operations. So that means customer support and repetitive tasks and pretty much anything that they do that they don't particularly need to be doing, and adding those workflows within the bot as well. So that's how we approach it. And I think that's the most valuable way too. It may not work for certain businesses. I can't say that applies to every single business, but usually every business has those three areas to where they can do at least something to an extent, even if it's very simple, to apply each of those phases. So that's how we approach it. And I think that's the most valuable way, so that, you can actually take full advantage of it.
No, that's really interesting, because I think you're right. I do see a lot of marketing and sales bots, and it's the logical sort of next step to
right.
streamline operations. I mean, do you see with some of your clients that they begin to consolidate, channels when they also have operations being automated through, the chatbot channel specifically?
Yes, a little bit, not too much, honestly. And by channels, do you mean like softwares that they use or channels that they're reaching people on?
Right. I guess maybe a good example would be something like, a company has a ticketing system that they're using right now as like a front end for customer support, whereas with the chatbot, you could facilitate the sales and marketing, and then also sort of key in, hey, if you have questions, we can sort of funnel it or route it to a live person, or try and address some things in an automated nature.
Yeah, okay, totally. I think right now, honestly, not a whole lot, just because it's still a lot of testing and experimenting. And quite frankly, because we haven't consolidated some of the other channels, like say email and, the messenger bot on their site, then it still makes sense to have those other channels like Zendesk and Intercom and customer support channels, for example, right? And a lot of the softwares that they use can just be implemented. So we haven't seen too much of the consolidation. I think it's just more of the bot making those relationships between the other platforms more fluid.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you're talking about like more integrations specifically.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Kind of making possible workflows that aren't entirely possible just with, say, Zapier, for
Mm-hmm.
example, right? Some people try to do stuff between their email campaign software and their CRM, and then maybe sending a message to their users. And that's fantastic. It works very well. But I think the bot is a added step there to where it already collects a lot of the data that you usually have to collect manually from your users. And so it just makes things a lot easier to where you can even skip over certain parts of asking users, or customers rather, for information, because you are already collecting the data that Facebook collects.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that makes complete sense. Sort of maybe switching gears and going backwards here a little bit. What was like the initial jumping off point for you getting into bots, and why did you feel comfortable to make that jump, more from like an entrepreneurship question?
Yeah. I think for me, so it was a little bit before I dropped out of college. And so it was, starting an agency was my means of cash flow. Essentially, before that, I was working for Startup Grind, which is, they say, the world's largest entrepreneur community. They have chapters all over the world. And so I built out their university department because they weren't outreaching to universities, but it makes a lot of sense for them to, because that's where a lot of new entrepreneurs are being bred. And so I did that for about a year while I was attending USC in LA. And when chatbots came out, though, in 2016, that was like midway when I was working with them, and I wasn't ready to make that jump. And also I was about to go into college. So I was like, okay, I'll wait and see, experience that first year and see if I like it. But at the same time, I started working with different clients for social media management, Facebook ads. And then when bots came out, I figured why not try to work with them on that and see if the results were actually as powerful as they made them sound on F8. And from there, yeah, the results, as expected, were just insane, right? All the rates I mentioned, from retention and conversion to just the simple click and open rates, were mind blowing to everyone we worked with, as well as us. And so from that point on, so towards the end of 2016, I can't remember exactly which month it was, but we decided to entirely jump into bots. And the reason I was comfortable with that is because we had tested it. And it wasn't just a random, like, let's try to do this and hopefully I make money with it.
Yeah.
Right. I was actually still working with Startup Grind and decided to just start that and make sure that it was going to be good before I left Startup Grind, even though I've always been entrepreneurial anyway. So I wasn't too worried, but I wanted to make sure that I wouldn't be out of cash. And so pretty much did that for the rest of 2016. And then in early 2017, I dropped out of school. My agency was doing much more than in terms of revenue than my Startup Grind job. So I left that. And then from there just started traveling and building the agency. So that's kind of how I got into it. It wasn't a fast leap by any means. It was kind of a slow ascend into, a successful agency or profitable agency. And then we were able to do, 20 to 30 clients a month, just because a lot of them were simple bots at the beginning. And that really helped us grow. And as well as Whitelabel partnerships was, I think, probably the key factor to actually being able to successfully jump into bots full time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really fantastic point about Whitelabel partnerships because, I think there's a lot of marketing agencies out there and they have a lot of skills and conventional marketing tactics. And I think, in the agency world, we sort of see like segments as far as like how fast they're willing to adopt new technologies. And I've seen this quite a lot, where agencies will start in a specific area and then they'll also add digital, but they're not that good at digital, but they still
right.
And, I think a lot of them are interested in bots, so I do think it's a really great strategy that I know you've been a really big advocate about. And, I think a lot of other people in the space should start looking into this a bit more.
Yeah, no, I think it's really powerful because, like you said, so many agencies have a very specific focus. Oftentimes, not many are full stack or like full service, right, where they do everything digital or everything offline. And so because of that, there are a lot of gaps. And oftentimes what I found is that many marketing agencies do try to partner with other agencies, but then their services kind of conflict or whatever it is, they don't work or align well with what they're doing. And so with bots, it was just kind of an easy sell to the partners because with any service you're currently offering, so our main agency partners are social media management, content marketing, SEO/website development, and Facebook ads or native advertising. Right. And so with those, a chatbot is just a power move for them as opposed to a conflicting service. And so that was what really helped us and why I totally recommend to all of our students as well as our community, if you are a freelancer, especially, or a small agency, and you are maybe better at the bot building and development side of things as opposed to the sales and marketing, and you don't want to go and cold email a billion people every day, and you don't want to go walk into businesses, then the best thing to do is set up a few partnerships, however you can, big or small, and then from there be able to automate that sales process for yourself and get really good at the bot craft so that then eventually, you can hire on a sales or marketing co-founder or contractors or whatever it is. But it's a really great starting point for people who don't have a whole lot of manpower. And by manpower, I mean, number of employees or people working on the business.
Right. No, absolutely. I think those are all really great tips. I think also if you could maybe go into some of the initial challenges of just like starting the agency itself.
Many.
I think not only, like the challenges specifically to bots, but also the challenges just to an entrepreneur of starting an agency up. And, I think it was just, you and your co-founder Kyle initially, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was just us. And it was actually both our first business.
Oh, wow.
We'd always both been entrepreneurial and we both worked with startups and semi-big companies, working with them. But this was our first actual business, if you will. Yeah. So I think the initial challenges really were you kind of got two sides of it, right? Like you mentioned, you've got the fact that bots are so new that no one knows what they are. And trying to explain it in words is just leads to failure and losing the deal.
Yeah.
Quite honestly. And so being able to show that was the biggest lesson that we learned was don't even try to explain it, just show it to them, whether it's a video or a live demo, something that they can visualize, right? And then start to put together their own understanding as opposed to us hoping that, thinking about live chat or other things will help them get to the conclusion of what a chatbot actually is. So that was one of the initial challenges. The others were working together, honestly, I think was probably the biggest thing. And luckily it worked out to where we're still working together now.
Nice.
But I think for most businesses that fail, it's a lot of the relationship side of things and people not being willing to change a little bit or change their habits or how they operate or be open-minded to other ways of structuring a business is what leads to a lot of startup failure in particular. And so for us, it was because we're pretty opposite, we did clash on certain, ways to run a business and work just because I'm very organized and I kind of fall in between technical and non-technical to where I have a little bit of technical experience, but I really enjoy design and marketing and community management and things like that. And so that was where my strengths lied. And then Kyle's the entire opposite, where as well as the fact that I love being online and I've met all my best friends online. And so Kyle's the entire opposite, where he does everything in person. He is a great salesman and he's organized, but not to the point that I am where I have something on my calendar for like every hour of the day. It's just how I operate. I've tried to simplify it, but quite frankly, it makes sense to be overly organized so that if something does fall out of place, that you have that routine and that structure to fall back on so that you can just reorganize that, as opposed to being like, oh crap, now I have to like reschedule all my meetings for the day. And like, I don't even know when they are because they're not on my calendar, and all of these crazy chaotic things that can happen quite realistically often in a startup. And so those two conflicting, I guess, operating systems was one of the challenges at the beginning, definitely trying to figure out, okay, how can we work together and have a system that works for us? And that ended up being a operating system by Edward Deming, who I'd recommend checking out to anyone who's listening in terms of how to set up your business with systems and processes. Right? A lot of people talk about systems and processes, but there's not like a framework or philosophy that they really follow. And so he has just a great framework for how to set that up in your business, as well as the fact that he used it to bring Toyota back to life, like in the 90s or 80s, and then Ford and a couple other companies. So that was something that Kyle had learned at one of his startups and something we applied to our business, which I actually have on a whiteboard back here. It's
Nice.
like entirely filled. Yeah. So that's an example of one of the systems. I can't really see it, but so that's what's helped us even up until today, because we just filled that out yesterday again. Really gave us a good idea of everything that was going on in the business. So that was a big challenge, was just trying to figure out how do we visualize everything that we're doing and actually understand what each other are doing on a daily basis. That was probably a really difficult challenge for us in the beginning because we operate differently. And so it was like, okay, what's your daily routine like? What are you working on today? And just having that meeting every day at the beginning of the workday was critical for us to get over that road bump. If we didn't have it, then we'd have a really bad work day and I'd be working on something totally different. We might even be doing double work. So having that transparency and communication was the second biggest lesson I learned on the entrepreneurial operating side of things.
No, I think that's all, really inspiring, not only from like the sales component, right? Because I think any time there's new technology, you always have to get over the sales component of like, how do you properly articulate business outcomes to the stakeholders you're actually going after? And then similarly from an operations side, I think it's always somewhat fairly obscure, especially if it's a new technology, of how do you organize this business in a coherent way that actually drives results consistently. So I think, I hope a lot of our viewers actually check out Edward Deming's. Was that it?
Yes, do it. Yeah, it's Edward Deming. Yes, Deming, Deming.
Cool. I will definitely take a look at that myself. So
Awesome.
I'm super stoked for that. So during that like initial, like evolution of the company, what were like those initial like wins that you and Kyle saw that were just like, oh man, we really have something here, and we're going to stick to this thing, this chatbot thing, and try and scale it out?
Yeah, I think the first initial win was us actually getting a client or a company to say yes, like you guys can do bots for us and we're going to pay you what you guys are asking. Because before that it was just okay, upsell, people we've already worked with or are working with on bots, and then got good results for them, but then didn't end up working with them on a monthly basis for whatever reason. And so having that first client win, I think, was like adding fire, or adding fuel to the fire, right? To where that just got us really stoked. And that's what I've realized as well, teaching people, is that if you can give little wins throughout their journey, they are way more likely to succeed, as opposed to someone who doesn't get a win for, say, 3 or 4 months. And at that point, they want to give up, and most likely will. So having that initial win was huge for us. And then the second biggest win was probably, so we kind of stumbled upon agency partnerships randomly, almost, or by chance. Of course, it's not a new concept by any means, and we probably would have done it at some point. But I had someone reach out to me on LinkedIn who asked me, hey, I want to build bots for my clients, but I don't know how to do it, and I'd like to outsource that to you guys. And so that really opened our eyes to be like, oh, holy crap, we can actually do this for him as well as other agencies, hopefully, and then make our lives a lot easier, as well as add a ton of value to them and their clients. So everyone wins in that situation. So signing that partner deal was probably the second biggest thing, which kind of helped us grow on an exponential trend in a way, because up until then we'd kind of slowly been chugging along, right? And then all of a sudden it was like, boom, like instant leads and sales coming in and bots to build. So that was the second biggest win. And then I think the third was when, and it was a little bit more subtle, because one of my favorite quotes from an entrepreneur that I spoke with, say a year ago, was that the entrepreneurship is a battle with short triumphs in between. That's not how it was said. It was said way better than how I remember. But essentially, those little triumphs tend to be subtle, right? Because people often ask, when do you know that you're successful? And there's not a certain point to that, because you're constantly growing if you're an entrepreneur, right? You constantly are taking on new projects. And so they each have life cycles of their own. And then you also grow with those life cycles. Obviously, you're ascending for most of the time, but nonetheless, things are always so different that there's no way to really measure that success, right? You're just happy that you have enough money to live and that you're able to operate something that you're passionate about, hopefully. And so for me, it was more of a subtle win, I think, to where we realize, like, wow, we're actually working with a lot of clients on a monthly basis. A lot of our sales are automated because of a few partners that we've now solidified, and things are going really good. We're getting great results for our clients. And at that point, I think it was more of like a happy thought, almost, to where it was a big win, because then you talk about it in situations like this and you're like, wow, I can't believe I did that, and so, yeah, something that I was really proud of, I think. So those are probably the three beginning wins that happened in the beginning. And then School of Bots came along and all sorts of other stuff. But, that would take forever to talk about. So I think those were our three main wins for sure.
Cool. I love it. I think little wins, for anyone are really important. And, I think just hearing it, and providing that perspective for a lot of people out there, I think is really, really helpful. So now that you guys like have some traction in the space, and you guys are scaling out your School of Bots, and I'm sure you're probably scaling out the operations for your marketing agency. What do you really think or sort of see as the vision that you're trying to go after in regards to the chatbot space? I know it's a really broad question, but I think specifically bots, there's a lot of like really cool stuff we can do with this stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the problem, I think, right? Is or not even problem, but opportunity, right? Is that the established roles that exist in most industries simply have not been formed yet in the bot world. And so for us to be at this moment in the industry where people are trying to fill certain roles, but just haven't yet because it's so new, is so crazy to think about. And I think we're really lucky to have stumbled into the space at this time, because we now have the opportunity to help it advance and be a part of history, essentially, right? And so I think for our vision for School of Bots and the agency, but more of School of Bots, because I think the agency is just a regular business, right? As opposed to, I think School of Bots is doing something in a way disruptive, even though there's nothing to disrupt, right? Is the best way to put that. And so our vision is to be the one-stop shop for everything chatbots, right? And eventually voice as well. And who knows what else will come along. But that's really our long-term vision, the aim that can't be entirely accomplished, right? But just something that we're moving towards, which is also a Deming concept. Fun fact. So I think that's like the overall vision. But then for us, what that really looks like is we started with one program that was intended to teach people how to build, sell, and monetize chatbots. We had a great success rate with it. We partnered with ChatFuel for it. And so that was a big win for us in our first move into the space as an education brand. And then from there, over the last 6 months, we've started an interview show / podcast, which we do on Facebook Live and then put all over social media. We have a template marketplace. We've built out a couple different programs. We just ran a challenge, which was really exciting, a 3-day challenge. We have done all sorts of different live events and in-person workshops and things. So I think our next moves and what our brand will look like in, say, a year from now is a lot more team training. So going into marketing teams and not just partnering with them to build bots for them, but actually teaching their teams how to use this technology effectively. As well as hopefully a university licensing curriculum, which kind of goes along with social stuff. Yeah, I'm really excited for that because obviously our products are more on the high end, which we did purposely because we wanted high quality people who are actually already have an established business or are doing well financially, right? I don't want to prey on the people who have no money and are trying to spend their last dime on, some sort of information.
Yeah.
And so, which tends to happen a lot in the information space. But that's why we position ourselves in that way so that hopefully everyone who invests in our services and products can afford them. And so in terms of the university licensing curriculum, that's something I'm probably most excited about because I've always wanted to do something with schools and help improve the school system or empower the students. And I could never find a way to effectively do it, quite honestly. There's so many ways you can do it, but there's so much red tape, just like with enterprises and corporate, that it's really difficult to get anything done unless it's very revolutionary and, eye-catching at the beginning. So that's something that we'll hopefully do soon is license that out to universities and community colleges, the curriculum that we've put together, but just shift it a little bit more. That's something we're working on, as well as just a lot of big partnerships, which I'm really excited about. And I think that'll really just push our brand forward. And so I don't know what we'll look like in a year, but I know it'll be us with our, in a bunch of different pools of education and just trying to help people with free and paid content.
Awesome. I think it's a great vision. And, I wish I was going to college still, and then I could take a chatbot class for free or something like that. No, that's super awesome.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I think for that, and obviously I won't go into too much detail because I don't even know what it'll look like yet, but hopefully we're trying to make it a extracurricular workshop or at some schools so that people who don't go to the college can actually attend the class and either pay for it or it'll be free. We'll have to figure that out. And then the other piece we'll be a part of some, AI curriculum or something at a college. So we'll see kind of what route it takes, but not to say that you can't take it.
That's true.
If you wanted to.
Sweet. So I'm sure you've seen so many bots by this point. I know you and your company have already developed 80 bots, and I'm sure, your students have developed, hundreds of bots by this point. Have you used a bot provided, I guess your expectations at this point that you thought was really, really good?
Yeah, I think that actually recently, because I hadn't seen it, and I don't know exactly when they launched it, but Marriott Rewards was actually a bot that I was very impressed with. I think they did a great job, and I don't know who created it, but if you're listening now, good job. And I think that's probably one that impressed me recently. At the beginning, I think that semi-hard question because I'm trying to think which ones I liked at the beginning. I definitely like Hipmunk a lot. And these are a little bit more general, like almost bots as a platform, as I like to call them. They can stand alone, but they are still channels for another business model that lives on web or wherever. So I think those two are probably the ones I was most impressed with, just because they did a great job of interacting with people and also having their own personality. I think Poncho was probably one of the first ones I also talked to. And even though it's a great concept and really cool, I didn't really like the personality of it, just a personal preference. And so that's why I didn't talk to that one too much. But I think they did a fantastic job as well, because even though that persona didn't appeal to me, it appealed to their, I think, millions of users now, or who knows, where they're at this point. So I think those are probably the ones that impressed me the most throughout my bot journey. And we actually, Kyle and I collectively tested probably like 500 bots, I think was what we ended up doing. So we talked to a lot of them, and quite honestly, most of them don't meet your expectations for whatever reason. Maybe it's a wall of text that they add in the bot, or they add videos and images that aren't that exciting or don't align with their brand. So it's a little bit confusing when they send that to you in the conversation or whatever it is. There's always little things that kind of pop up at this point. But I think the biggest thing that I've realized is that with all of these good bots, or these few good bots, and a lot of the spammy or just not interactive bots, is that the bot space has made that shift a lot more quickly than apps. And what I mean by that is that from just fun and games to actual utility and meaning and value, that change has happened a lot more quickly with bots than with apps. Because if you remember, you had the bubble popping one, and drinking beer and all these different apps on the iPhone, and no one really knew what to do with it yet. But now you can talk to your bank and figure out all sorts of utility and meaningful use cases for your apps. And so I think bots have reached that point to where there are a lot of good bots now that weren't there, say, a year ago. So I think those are the three I'll shout out, but happy to share a list as well that I actually just shared with my students of bots that I think are phenomenal.
Cool. No, I love it. I think you're right. The evolution is moving so fast in this space. It's like whether, you're looking at like the fintech sector, you're looking at, health and wellness, or pretty much all these sectors right now are experimenting with bots. But I think it's, yet to be seen that we're beginning to see like a standard of good bots. I think
totally.
There's a lot of like good bots here and there, and I think the other thing to maybe delineate as well is, bots that are leveraging NLP versus bots that are just using rules-based and hybrid bots. And, I think that all can be a little tricky for some people. So I'm curious to like, hear your thoughts on that. Not anything in specific, but maybe just generally.
Yeah, I think in terms of comparing the two, obviously NLP will be very necessary, say within the next year or two, just because hopefully that will advance on Messenger as well as the other platforms, so that, there may be some built-in NLP by them, or just the fact that it'll be necessary for us. But I think for now, it does make sense to guide people as much as we can, so that it almost is like an app-like experience where it's not a regular conversation just yet. It's a lot of guidance with buttons and quick replies and, specific instructions saying, hey, type this or tap this or swipe here. And so I think that'll be necessary at least for the next year or two, because users, quite frankly, just don't know how to use this interface yet with businesses in that way, right? They're not used to tapping on buttons and seeing web views pop up and all these different things. They're just used to having regular conversations. So I definitely believe that eventually all bot conversations will be entirely NLP driven, and there won't be, hey, tap this button and, look at this menu and stuff. But I think for now it makes a lot of sense. And it also differentiates chatbots from voice bots, because with voice, as I think we may have talked about, voice only can really provide a few utilities. For example, Amazon Alexa skills, right? You're not going to try to discover new companies on Alexa. You want to get things done with the companies that you already work with, whether that is Amazon and ordering something from them, or
Alexa, stop.
Oh no, did it hear me?
Yeah, it started playing the news.
Oh, no way. That's so funny. Of course that happened. Okay, I won't say it again. I won't say um but yeah, so having that difference between the two is key, and that's why chatbots are such an opportunity for companies right now, is because the discoverability element is huge with Messenger, right? There's 1.4 billion people on the platform, or more than that at this point. And because of that, Facebook Messenger and Facebook have made it easy for you to be able to be discovered by new users. With, I won't say her name, it's hard to discover new users because you need to drive people to your skill before they actually get there. Right. And so I think that's where chatbots are different, and also why they win right now. And that guidance, I think, will probably still be prevalent, like I said, for the next year or two. But then after that, I think being more NLP driven will be kind of the golden standard, if you will.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I see similar trends right now, as you talk about that. It's just like NLP is good, but it's not that good yet. And, I think that's
Yeah.
going to be the tipping point, right? Because it's like when you're trying to drive some sort of conversion right now, it's like buttons do a really good job of keeping people, within like the boundaries of like this,
Right.
whereas like NLP, like you can try and do that and try and have leading questions and say, something like, are you interested in a doctor's appointment? But if it's like open-ended, then it's like people like sometimes I think people like try and break the bot for fun or something like that.
No, totally.
Like, what's the weather?
So. Yeah, I have had, I mean, I'm sure you have as well. I have had people just say all sorts of crazy stuff. Like, hey, can you translate this word into French? Or like, what time do I get out of school? Or like, can I order my groceries or whatever? And it's just like, okay, obviously. And I think it comes with the fact that they know it's an automated service. And so they don't feel that judgment almost of a human, right? So they'll say, I mean, I've seen all sorts of crazy, like, cussing out the bot, and then a human hops into the conversation and they're like, oh my gosh, like I thought it was an automated service. I'm so sorry. Right. And so the fact that they, oh, sorry, muted myself for a second. The fact that they feel that way shows that we definitely do need to keep them on the right track. And that I think NLP right now, and just the nature of us humans, is that we have so much variety in the way that we talk, type, which is, I think, even a little bit different than how we talk, as well as just all the different ways that we can say things. And so because of that, NLP is really difficult to have as the sole interpreter of a bot in a user conversation, which is why I think buttons and quick replies will still be very prevalent within the next few years, just because it's needed. And like you said, AI engines right now just simply cannot handle all of that variety, to where there's always some piece of it that comes to this extent where it says, okay, you know what, I can't answer your question. Let me, hand this over to a human. And so that'll happen a lot more quickly with NLP driven bots, as opposed to buttons and quick replies, where users can guide themselves and eventually find a conclusion or a solution. And then if they need to, then they can talk to the human. But I think it happens a lot more quickly with NLP, simply because there's just so much variety, right, of what a user can say, and languages and all these different factors, like you mentioned.
Definitely. I'm actually really curious because, I know you probably know this specifically with Chatfuel. There are some integrations now with like Dialogflow or other like NLP, engines. Like, what's your opinion on that? And do you think like it's like even worth it to do that, or?
I think it's worth it to understand how Dialogflow works. They just made an update for V2 earlier this year, which made it a little bit more difficult for non-technical people to use the platform. And so I think it's definitely necessary at some point in your bot, and also depending on your user base, right? If you're, say, only going to reach like 500,000 subscribers or something, then it may not be necessary for you to implement this as much. But if you're working with 1 million, then you definitely want NLP within your bot, and even less than that, right? But just kind of giving a comparison there.
Sure.
And so I think learning Dialogflow, just because that is the most popular one right now, makes the most sense. And I think they will continue to grow with the bot space, just because you can integrate it with pretty much any bot platform. And so it makes sense to just understand how it works, even if you don't use it right now.
Yeah.
Because again, like I said, if you're non-technical, which a lot of people in the bot space are right now, it's like 50-50, you will simply not be comfortable with using it and implementing it. But just understanding how it works and the fact that it exists and is possible is important. And then if you can outsource that to someone or figure it out on your own, then that's great. But adding even a little bit of it will be powerful for the bot, just to be able to train it and then understand that. Because with platforms like Chatfuel and ManyChat, all of their AI is static to where it simply doesn't do the job well enough and doesn't capture the words to a certain extent that you type in or phrases. And it gets a little bit confusing for you. And you're like, okay, how do I actually make it respond to these phrases with this? And the only way to really do that is with Dialogflow. So I think once your bot becomes a little bit more complex, then it makes sense. But at the beginning, just understanding how bots work in general and creating that on Chatfuel, ManyChat, whatever platform it is, will be the best approach, I think.
Cool. Are you beginning to like see more of those bots, whether it's through, your students or bots that you guys work on, where you guys are beginning to like, really, create that interplay? Because I see there are like some limitations, specifically trying to deal with like context and state management between, Chatfuel attributes and Dialogflow.
Yeah.
What do they call it? Just like context, I guess, can be sort of tricky sometimes.
Yeah, no, I think, the unfortunate part is that I think Chatfuel was built with that, in the back of their minds, but
Yeah.
at the same time, it's still, like you said, it's not entirely fluid.
Yeah.
And I think that will hopefully get a lot better towards the end of the year as they continue to improve the platform. But definitely, I do see a little bit of, there's many issues that kind of happen,
Yeah.
and it's not all Chatfuel's fault, right? It's definitely Messenger, and they're updating the platform every day and making changes. So there are little glitches that happen. But yeah, I do see a little bit of conflict that happens with the
Cool.
context and Chatfield attributes, because everything's not perfect. But I think there's not as much as there was, say, like 6 months ago. It's definitely improved, I can say. So hopefully it'll improve even more in the coming months.
Awesome. It's cool. So sort of segueing from like, the challenges we're discussing about NLP, for example, what other challenges do you currently see in like the chatbot space that you think need to be resolved before we can get to this next like idealized level of good chatbots, for example?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. So the first would be what I mentioned before, was the approach that people have to bots. And the reason is because what ends up happening for people who just approach bots with the idea that they will just solve lead generation or qualification is that a few months in, they're not really getting any value from the bot. And the quality of leads may be better, maybe the same, maybe worse than what their other acquisition channels were. And so because they're not implementing the bot as much as they can throughout their business, then they kind of lose the value of it and then think that it's just good for lead acquisition and don't think about it too much after that. So that's one thing I think that needs to be solved, is companies taking full advantage of the bot and actually trying to use this technology as much as they can. The second thing would be onboarding users, and we've talked a little bit about this, so I won't dive too much into detail, but yeah, having a good instructional guidance throughout the experience with the bot is key. And a lot of people don't do that, to where if there's a menu presented, for example, in a gallery in Facebook Messenger, but it's not clear where the buttons are going to take users, they're not going to click on the buttons, simply because they have no idea what's going to happen after they do that. So having guidance and clarity as to what each next step looks like for the user is also key. And I see a lot of bots that fail to do this, and then their user count sucks, their engagement sucks, because people simply don't know what the point of the bot even is. And so having that clarity as well is really important to your users from the beginning. And you can do that in the greeting text, you can do that in that welcome message, or the first message that people get, just to give them an idea of what the goal of the bot is, whatever it is, simple or just representing a company, whatever it is, making that clear to the user, which a lot of bots just don't do yet. And I think the third thing would be understanding when to present your offer at the right moment, and also understanding when to talk to people. And luckily, Messenger has set those boundaries, whereas email never could, just because there's not one platform right? There's always a way to email someone, even if they blocked you on another email or whatever it is, right? But with Messenger, you can just turn off messages from a page. And so in order to prevent that, though, a bunch of users doing that to you is to actually make sure that your offer is presented at the right time and that you're messaging people at the right time. You don't want to message someone at 3 a.m. their time. You don't want to spam them with content, cough Grant Cardone, whose bot, just sends all sorts of stuff every single day. And like, even if you unsubscribe, it will still send you that, or unsubscribe, right, to where you say, hey, I don't want to get messages. It says, great, you're confirmed for that. And then it sends you something again the next day. All right. So experiences like that, where simply, the bot is not keeping its word, if you will, right? The business is not doing what it tells the user it will. And that trust and relationship is the most important and delicate part of this entire new space. And so the longer you can keep that fluid with your users and actually be honest with them and say, hey, we plan to message you each day or each week or whatever it is, and then actually following through with that and delivering some sort of value or education, is something that most bots lack. It's getting a lot better. I've noticed in the last 6 months, there's a lot more bots that actually follow some sort of framework, or this is their goal, even if it's not entirely clear. They do a good job of presenting their sale offer at the right time, as well as not blasting users every day with unnecessary messages. But definitely something that Facebook is cracking down on, but not enough. And so it's really the bot builder's loss, though. It's not. Facebook can ban as many people as they want, or as little, and it wouldn't make that big of a difference, because the ultimate loss is for that business, right? Is that the fact that they will not be able to message or interact with that person anymore on Facebook Messenger unless they unblock them, which is very unlikely, because as humans on messaging platforms, we have conversations with all sorts of people that we're not going to remember that one company that was annoying. It doesn't make sense, and it's kind of in the back of our minds at that point. So not losing that relationship is key, even if you don't talk to your users that much, but making sure that you, again, present your offer at the right time and also don't blast users unnecessarily.
Cool. No, I think those are really great tips. Just like set realistic boundaries, and the onus really does fall with the marketers. I think, that's always been the challenge. I think with marketers and leveraging tactics, it's always just like, do not abuse the channel. Otherwise, you're going to get like 0.6% click-through rates. And,
right.
So I think that's, just looking at 90% open rates today and, sort of extrapolating that to like 10 years from now, I think, the onus really does lie with marketers to understand that, hey, if you create a bunch of noise, that your signal to your end users is going to end up going down just as a result of people getting conditioned to ignoring the message. So, I think definitely more education has to sort of proliferate amongst all these marketers right now that are entering this chatbot space. So I think it's a really good point you're making.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm glad you agree, because I think we have similar experience in terms of what we've seen, and, obviously working on different things, but nonetheless, these things become prevalent as you start to interact with other people in the space as well. So definitely so.
Absolutely. So something a little bit related to obstacles. On the other hand, what are like some facts or insights about chatbots that were really inspiring to you in regards to, maybe things that you guys individually discovered, or things that your students had discovered that were just like really like crazy? And it's just like, I had no idea that thing's working, or this thing's happening.
Yeah. I think one that's not too surprising, but at the same time is the retention rates. That we first got for our clients. And now I think, gosh, I can't remember off the top of my head, it's 20 or, oh no, it's not. It's more. Okay, I'm not even going to say it because it's probably going to be wrong. But it was a really high retention rate that we were able to get through the first bots that we built, as well as our students. And so I think every time that happens for an individual, even if, it's kind of coming and it makes sense because it's such an intimate channel, that was probably the most mind-blowing thing to me, was that, wow, people are actually coming back every day. We're actually creating a habit-forming product here, something that's valuable to them enough to where, or interesting, or whatever it is, that they want to come back and talk to it every day or every other day. So I think that was probably the biggest thing, because then that showed me the power of the channel, right? The fact that people are willing to become loyal followers at a much faster pace as opposed to email. Email just takes much longer, I think. And also, like you said, there's a lot of noise on most other channels. And so, quite frankly, not everyone's going to read your email every day unless they are diehard, and that'll be, your 1,000 loyal fans or whatever it is. Other things that were surprising to me, I guess at the beginning, was just the fact that there were so many bots that didn't really do anything. Like I said, one of the biggest issues is that when you message a bot, a lot of them don't tell you what the purpose of it is or what you're going to get out of it. And just explaining what the purpose is makes it very clear to the user, hey, I should be talking to this bot, or I shouldn't be talking to this bot because I'm not interested in that at all. And if you don't share that, then you will almost get false user numbers to where a lot of people talk to your bot because maybe you're running ads or they're messaging your page or finding you on the Discover tab, but they actually don't care about your business because you didn't make it clear to them what your bot is actually all about, especially if your bot is a spin-off from your actual business, to where it's like you're just using it for a campaign you're running or a specific branch of your business. So that was probably the most surprising thing to me, was just that not enough people, or hardly anyone, said what the bot was supposed to do. And then what else was interesting to me? I don't know. I guess an interesting realization, not so much bot specific, but just in general, has been really interesting seeing all the roles that have appeared in the space. You've got people who are coming in from the online course world and Facebook ads and online business, like almost pyramid scheme MLM type of people, right? And so you've got a lot of get rich quick people who have jumped in and out of the space. There are conferences that have popped up. There are certain influencers, if you will, and brands. And then finally, I think we now have an ecosystem that makes me happy looking at it, right? Is we have all the different pieces from analytics to copy to the technical piece of it. So like you said, the NLP engines like Dialogflow, you have your bot builders like Chatfuel and ManyChat, and you have your bot mapping platforms like Bot Society or BotMock. And so it's all kind of coming together much faster than I expected. So even though that's kind of like just a realization I've made, nonetheless, it is surprising to me how quickly all of these things have developed. And it's also funny how many bot platforms come out every day. There's probably like 2 or 3 new platforms. And then people always message me and say, hey, will you check out my new platform? Like, it's like Chatfuel, but for like this, or for, these people. Right? And I'm like, okay. And I've talked to Chatfuel about those platforms as well. And they're like, yeah, they always end up, or most of them end up failing, and then they just come back to using us. All right. So that's also funny to see just how many new things are popping up in the space every day. So hopefully
I think you're right. I think the community is finally gaining some sense of tangibility, because I remember going to conferences, very early this year, and even moving to conferences, later this year. I think there definitely is, some best practices that are beginning to sort of percolate to the surface right now. And I think that's always sort of a necessity. It's always like, when the technology first emerges, people are so enamored by the technology, they forget that, hey, this can drive some sort of business outcome. And now people are finally have failed enough, which is good because we can learn from it, where people now are saying, okay, well, let's do this and not that. And, let's share these best practices, so I think that's really cool. And then your point about, the platforms, I think that's something, from just like a technology trend we see often a lot too. And, it's my opinion, I guess, that within the next 1.5 to 2 years, you're right, a lot of those will be either totally failed, or they're going to start becoming acquisition targets for some of the large incumbent platforms.
Right. No, totally. I think so. Like we even saw that with Motion.ai, and HubSpot, like that happened very quickly for them. And so it totally makes sense that that's the way things are moving. And so I totally think that, yes, like these channels will either get acquired or grow so big that they acquire other people in the space.
Yeah, definitely. I know you already sort of touched on, some best practices already when we talk about obstacles, but if you could maybe share like 1 or 2 other ones. I definitely don't want to make you go through a whole list because I know there are probably at this point.
No worries. Yeah. And I think there are best practices, but at the same time, what we realized, especially teaching people in this space, is that, and because it was quite frankly my first time teaching people, was when we created the program, I didn't really have any best practices in terms of teaching. to follow on. And so I think the biggest thing I realized is that it's all about your strategy, and the tactics will always change. But that was the biggest mindset shift for me, was understanding that the best practices lie in strategy as opposed to tactics. And before I thought that, so, I would teach people how to do everything exactly, creating something in Chat Fuel, and then, how to create this Facebook ad, and, all these step-by-steps and templates and scripts. And that's great, but it's all tactical. So that would be the one thing, is that make sure that you separate your tactics and strategies when you're building your bot, because that's, I think, the biggest thing I realized in teaching people. But in terms of just general best practices, one would be to make sure you format your messages in a readable way that's also normal to you as a user, right? And so for the bot, what we usually do is anytime we're going to add a visual, whether it's a GIF or a video or an image, it goes at the top so that they watch or look at that first. And then we put text below that and try to make it, I think, like between 3 to 5 sentences is usually the perfect amount, or less than that. Because then what happens is once you get past that, especially if you're not separating your lines, which a lot of people don't, and they just have this huge paragraph or wall of text, then it becomes very annoying for your readers. People don't like reading long text. Like, especially for us in like Gen Z or millennials, your friend sends you a super long text and you're like, oh God, I got to read that. And then like you may skim it, or you may actually read it like 5 days later or something, when you actually want to face it. And so we don't want to get those messages just in general, not even just for our generations, but anyone who's reading something on their phone doesn't want to see a wall of text. And so making sure that doesn't happen, to where, going back to the format I mentioned, having that image or visual, then having that text, then offering an interaction at the very bottom is probably the best format you can use. Because what happens if you go out of order or add different types, where, for example, for the people who are familiar with this, you have got an image, the text, and then you've got a button, and then maybe you have a gallery card, and then you have a quick reply. That's very confusing for your user, because they're like, what the heck, which option do I choose? There's too many. And it doesn't make for a successful conversation. And so having a very simple format to where you can break things down as much as possible will be ideal. And probably the best example of this is an e-commerce store that has 200 products should not, and you can't actually list all of them in the same gallery, right? And so being able to break that down to the most general thing you could, whether it's man, woman, child, categories, or even colors, or whatever you want to do, having the most general category and then going to the most specific things is the best way to structure things. And so that kind of falls under this formatting, but it's more just a general best practice that you want to be able to start very broad and then go detailed and then track that, so that then you know exactly what people are interested in and how they interacted at each step in the conversation. Another best practice would be to have a menu, which you can actually see inside of the School of Bots bot if you guys want to check this out. And a couple other bots like TechCrunch have this, for example, but they set it up with an actual chat field plugin, as opposed to we do it manually, just because I think it makes more sense, to where you create, instead of just asking users, hey, do you want to subscribe to us, which doesn't really give you much more advantage over an email newsletter because it's very general. Instead, giving your users options to subscribe to specific topics of content. For example, for us, that looks like subscribe to weekly interview notifications, subscribe to template marketplace, new release notifications, case studies and updates about us, in different categories like that, right? You can start to visual or think about those for your own business. And so offering people the option to subscribe to each of those segments or topics, if you will, is a great practice that has really been successful for us, because then you're not blasting your entire list with stuff that only 20% of them care about. And again, your rates overall and analytics will be a lot better because you're actually hyper targeting and only giving people what they really want and not what they think is interesting but don't really care about. And then your engagement rates go down and you wonder why. And so being able to track that in that way is important for you, as well as just beneficial for the user. So I'd say those are two things, without, again, getting into a billion things. I think those are two things that have really helped us when we came to the realization of that, as well as our students. It's really helped them get better results, especially if they weren't doing that before, and just adjusting themselves to that strategy, or these tactics rather, has been really beneficial for them and their clients, and all the bots that we've built as well.
Cool. No, I totally love those tips. I think they're super tactical. And, even the first tip that you started out with, I think that's like super spot on because I think you're right. People get into the minutia of like, we have to do this thing exactly like this thing or this thing like this. And it's like, no, like if you think about the overarching strategy, if you had to distill it down at the highest level, it's just like figure out how to create value for your specific market segment and, design the bot around that. So I really love that point. Um, so that's sort of like the end of, I guess, my specific chatbot question. So I want to sort of give you the floor
Awesome.
now. Feel free to let people know what's going on with your agency or with your course or where they can find you at upcoming events.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So I don't have any upcoming events just yet because I've been speaking a bunch lately and I'm taking July to just kind of chill and grind and engage with my community. So if you guys do want to interact with me while I'm not in an event though, I will be doing a lot of content in my Facebook group. So I'm happy to have you guys there. Would love to have you. We've just hit over the 2,000 member mark. So we will be doing something special like a giveaway and other fun stuff. So you guys can join that if you go to facebook.com/groups/bot school. And in terms of what we're doing with the course and stuff, the agency, there's not too much you guys can engage with. But if you are a bot agency that is either looking to outsource for bot services or you build bots and want to get more leads, we do have a lot of partnership opportunities coming up for agencies, as well as a mentorship accelerator through our program, which will be a part of our main program, which is called Master Messenger Bots. So if you're an agency owner that wants to be a mentor for that, that is also a paid opportunity. So any really partnership or collaboration things that fall under that, as well as anything that that your audience can think of, like feel free to reach out to me at Natasha at ineffablemarketing.com. And ineffable is INEFFABLE. And I think that's it for me. We have a lot of awesome stuff coming up, but I won't spew it all out at you guys. So I think the best place to look would be our Facebook group. And we always keep people updated there and do fun stuff and giveaways and interviews and all of that.
Cool. Very cool. One last question I always like to
Yes.
ask all of our guests before they leave is, especially in a field where there's emerging technology, what is it that sort of keeps you motivated and inspired about this space and, what you do?
I think the biggest thing is realizing that this has helped so many people already on the user side of bots, but also people who are building bots. The opportunity to be a part of this new space and this emerging technology is so unique. And who knows, when the next one will be, right? There's always new stuff popping up, but something as big as this is very rare. It's like being at the beginning of email marketing, at the beginning of social media, at the beginning of websites. And so this is a rare opportunity in history. And so I'm reminded of that every day and grateful to be a part of it and actually fully be committed to this, because it's always been something I've struggled with, as I'm sure many productive people struggle with this to where you want to do all these different things. And so then you start to talk to other entrepreneurs and they're like, well, I have this agency, but I also have this other business and I'm also trying to manufacture these products. And I'm also trying to start a drop shipping store and I'm also trying to angel invest and all those things are great, but you can't do it alone. So unless you have a big team and assistant and are to that point, having these specific focuses or foci is going to be key. And that's the biggest thing I've realized and that I'm most grateful for, is that I finally found that balance for me. And I think that's what really keeps me driven, is that I don't know how long I'll be in the bot space, right? I'm really passionate about it. At the same time, I think it's been a great first vehicle for me as a business and as a starting entrepreneur. And so I'm hoping to be able to use this technology in other spaces that I move on to eventually, say in 4 or 5 years, right? Since I still am very committed to my agency and School of Bots, but nonetheless, whatever ends up happening, whether I sell them to, another company or continue to work on them, but have other people manage them, I think just the fact that I will be able to use bots for other industries I go into, like music or humanitarian efforts and philanthropic things, just makes me really happy that I have that skill set and that I've taken the time to understand that, and that I've gotten to meet amazing people like you who are in the space, who are genuinely pushing it forward and doing great work for people. So that's really what keeps me going, as well as, everything else that kind of has happened in my life because of bots. I have been able to travel around the world as well as now live in a great place and meet all sorts of people because I have something that's my own. And so that makes me really happy as well. So a lot of different things, but I'd say that's what keeps me going every day and gets me up in the morning.
Cool. I love it. I love the motivation. I love the perspectives. I love all the insight that you've been able to, bring into just this discussion today. So Natasha, thank you so much for being on our podcast today, and we will definitely have you back in the future.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in.
Thanks. See ya.